Hello everyone, welcome to a second thoughts overview of Yuan Bo of Grand Cathay. So as always, I went through the initial turns. I actually got early access for this, so I do have a feel for the faction. I have a few conclusions that I would like to share with you. So in the end of the video, as always, I'd like to show you some army compositions that I would like to try out, and of course feel free to share your experiences as well. This is not an in-depth guide, but it'll certainly help you out to understand the faction better and decide how to achieve your goals. Let's go play then with Yuan Bo, the Jade Dragon. So for your short victory, you need to construct any two of the 4 astromantic relay buildings and empower the Wu Jing compass. So basically this is basically a mechanic that he has. There's a couple of locations where you need to build a specific building that will then empower the compass, and all you need is 2 of them for the short campaign. It's very straightforward, very easy to obtain. Now the reward is +3 hero capacity for all heroes, which is good, although Cathay still only has 2 heroes to choose from, and thus it kind of loses a bit of its potential value. Now for the long victory, it requires the short victory, and then even though it says here a lot of stuff, it's just to complete the 4 buildings overall. It's very simple, pretty straightforward, and then there's a final battle for you to fight. It's pretty much a very simple long campaign, that's for sure. There's no more X amount of settlements, which is always nice. It leaves you a little bit more of a control over the campaign and how you want to do it. The reward is +10 hero recruit rank, excellent to give you better heroes as you proceed into domination goals. Now, speaking of Yuan Bo, Yuan Bo has the Dragon's Might, and he benefits from all regions that are owned by factions that you have trade agreements are visible to you. This is excellent. It gives you like a spy whenever you send a trade agreement, which is excellent for you. Diplomatic relations +20 with Grand Cathay. This will help out a lot, especially with some confederation possibilities in the beginning. Research rate +5% for each province capital, so prioritize those. That's really important. He's one of the fastest to research everything, and the Cathay research tree is really good. And hero capacity +2 for Astromancer. So overall, decent bonuses, encouraging some expansion, some trade. Excellent. Climate is average to good. It's a bit better than other Cathay lords, but still a difficult faction overall to conquer the whole map with. For the most part, you do start in green location and some yellow, so some unpleasant terrains here. The worst part is, of course, if you try to go to the north, then there's a lot of red. So that's the main issue here. Even though basically controlling all of Austria, you should complete the long campaign by then. And then who knows, maybe you decide to go for the whole map. It's still a difficult one, but by all means you can do it. Okay? Your starting location is actually a dual location. Let me show you here. You also start over there with this settlement, Changwu. You can then later choose if you wish to maintain this or just focus in your expansion on the other side. Now, both of these locations, they're really good because this one is a 4 settlement province, while the next one is actually a 3 settlement province, and you start with 2 of them, so it's excellent for you to start with a solid base, let's say, very quickly in the campaign. And then you have access to the sea and to this line, to the sea lane, so it's really great for you. It encourages you different playstyles as well, but typical expansion for the most part, of course, will be in Lustria to achieve your goals, your specific short and long victory objectives. Towards any of those, you can either focus going on to the Lizardmen, because taking a Hexwettle is one of the goals, as you see there, or you can go into the Rakarth area, so getting to the Great Turtle Isle, as you can see there. So yeah, basically your first enemy will always be these green skins that are located here, and then it's typically to you. Either you can go against Dark Elves, Lizardmen, or whatever. Overall, it's a very nice starting location, precisely because it's completely different than the typical Grand Cathay campaign. So, diplomatically, you're part of the Order Tide, but you will engage against Lizardmen for certain because they are a part of your objectives. You need to capture Hexotl, so it can destabilize that same order. So typical enemies will be lizardmen, the greenskins initially, the dark elves such as with the Brakath over here. You're gonna have to fight us off against Skaven, vampire coast located here. So overall you have plenty of different enemies just in Lustria, let alone if you start making targets back in Cathay. Allies will arrive also in many shapes. With the connections in Cathay you can surely get ogres, you can get Empire, Bretonia as well, high elves. They're very close behind, so that's a good idea. Maybe getting some good cavalry or some good monstrous infantry, or of course some single entities and even some missile units from the high elves. Overall you'll have plenty of opportunities to get a couple of different units for your forces. So for mechanics, you have Yin and Yang, which are now province-based. This is a significant change because the previous system was faction-wide. It's now basically a balance between Yin and Yang buildings in a province. You have 7 possible settings. First one is harmony. You have perfectly in the 0 for the harmony, so basically you do gain more campaign movement range, less upkeep, and more income from all buildings. All good effects. But if you go further into the Yang, you'll get more research rate, recruitment costs, recruit rank, and local recruitment capacity. So basically this makes the province into a military focus. Or you can go into an income focus and you go into the Yin. More growth, more control, less construction costs, less construction time. So overall, very nice ones, particularly for the military part. You will always get very good military provinces to get nice armies going. Now you also have the Ivory Road mechanic. This is quite a nice one, used for good old gold. Very simple. You'll dispatch a caravan, you'll select the destination of that caravan, and overall you decide how many goods you're going to carry and thus how much income you're going to get later. That's basically how it will work. In essence, you can increase the cargo, and of course there's going to be some events that will show up during the course of that location, because you're going to have some threats overall. As you can see here, it's perfectly fine, just a couple of battles, just a couple of events, but overall you should be able to reach out to your destination and get that good old juicy money. Now, then we have the compass. This has changed slightly for Yuan Bo. Why? Because he has 4 more directions that he can choose from, but you have to unlock those. For the most part, in the beginning you're going to have the same ones: the Celestial Lake, and you're going to have the Great Bastion one, you're going to have the Warpstone Desert, and you're going to have the Dragon Emperor's Wrath. These have changed slightly, so be sure to check them up to plan out your own. Remember that when you assign the compass to one direction, it increases the power of that specific direction, while decreasing the power of the other ones. So always make sure that you keep an eye on that, so that you don't get too many negatives. Or basically you don't get negatives, but you just don't get the positives as much as you could. Okay, now you also have these new 4 locations, which is nice for the compass, but you'll have to to unlock those by conquering that specific settlement and constructing the astromantic relay landmark buildings there. So always make sure that you check, maybe you want this for more growth and for less construction costs overall in Cathay regions. So maybe you want to focus going into the Great Turtle Isle. Maybe you want the other way around. You want to go for the characters being immortal and less attrition from all attrition, which is nice. Maybe you want to go for a hexodal. So that's sort of the idea here. Now, an added mechanic. Let's speak. Oh, yeah, we have the specific, one of the most specific mechanics, and one of the better for Yuan Bo is actually the Matters of State. So you have 2 unique resources: steel and stone. Now these, like it states there, you get 1 of each token available in every 5 turns. Winning battles will decrease this by 1 turn, so you keep a good eye and you can get a couple of these just fighting a lot. Each time you declare a new fortress city or commercial district, you're gonna get an additional steel and stone token. Okay, now there are plenty of mechanics here, because not plenty of mechanics, plenty of actions here. That's what I want to talk. So for instance, you can target one of your armies to get 1 turn of ongoing recruitment completed instantly. So you can get a almost instant army if you wish. This is perfect to have it when either in the early game to get an advantage, or if you're in a rush to get some units, you can just use global recruitment, and then suddenly, bam, it goes for it gives you a lot of recruitment really fast. So that's excellent. Or you can go and target any settlement and have its control and corruption reduced to 0. This is also perfect. You can get rush construction. And then you get better effects, such as an army that is loaned to you, a neutral or allied faction. Or you can target an allied faction and get the income to your own faction. So overall, there's definitely some differences here, some actions here that it can improve your campaign. So overall, yeah, good mechanics for Yuan Bo, a very interesting one. It allows you different opportunities. In terms of edicts, you have a control and less chance of a plague spreading. You have research rate, which is excellent, especially for you, because you do get a lot of it. You can go through the research tech 3 really fast with Yuan Bo. You also have less enemy movement, a defensive one, less enemy movement range, less corruption in your provinces, more melee defense. It's always nice, especially if you're under attack, of course. Income from trade tariffs, it's always a cool one. And then you have a recruitment cost and more local recruitment capacity. So adding to the typical effects from the yin or the yang, you can of course maximize those even with the edicts. Overall, very decent ones. Now, for the army stances, what we have, a very typical selection here. We have more Winds of Magic by 10% range. Then we have the encamp, typically 50% cost in movement. It enables replenishment, access to global recruitment, and it makes you immune to attrition, which is important, of course, especially in those unpleasant or uninhabitable terrains. Then we have the raiding, 50% cost in movement. Of course, it gives you some income from raiding and less control in the raided province, and it makes you immune to most attrition. By the way, it's always immune to most attrition. The plagues, for instance, are typically the exception here. You have an ambush costing 25% movement. Of course, the most important part is that your army gets hidden. And then you have forced march. Pretty straightforward ones. Be mindful, of course, when progressing into uninhabitable or unpleasant areas. Ensure that you have that encamp or raid stances to avoid attrition, of course. So speaking of buildings, there are no special buildings actually in your initial province in Lustria, but Shangwu actually has some buildings. Give me a second. Yeah, so the Celestial Riverlands there, and we're now in Shangwu. You can get the Palace of Scrolls, which gives you more allegiance points gained, plus 25%, more diplomatic relations with Grand Cathay, Lord Recruit rank plus 2 faction-wide, and more income from all buildings. This is a 4-settlement province, so of course that income from all buildings will be very good. In terms of military, let's take the opportunity here. So you have 6 buildings for military, with only 1 being able to be fully built in a minor settlement. Now at tier 3, you now have a little bit more options with, all the Jade units, of course, Jade Warriors, really good, especially for the early to mid game. Then you have some crossbowmen, of course, there, some Jade Lances, typically good cavalry, as well as some artillery, of course. And now you do have the Zhangu War Drum and the Lions, both the Jet Lion and the Jade Lion. This alone means that your tier 3 armies now are terrifying to your foes. Specifically, that's really good for this faction. Note that you also get Onyx Crowman on tier 2 on the barracks building, so you have kind of like a sort of cavalry, flying cavalry. That's how I like to consider it. As well, so yeah, definitely the units made, they're not an elite force. These units are not exactly the elite, but they made it so that you can get a lot of good early game combinations. Now, infrastructure, it follows the yin and yang structure, of course. So for the yang effect, you do have more growth and less construction cost. Then you also have the more income generated, and you have more control and recruit rank for peasant units, basically. And in the yin side, you have more growth and income from all buildings, same thing. You also get some more income generated and some income from trade tariffs, and slightly different here, more control, casualty replenishment rate, and less recruitment cost, almost none, minus 80%, so you can get a lot of peasant armies really fast. So you have to keep in mind all the changes and its effect on the province, of course, considering what you wish from that province to get to a specific yin or yang outcome, so be mindful. Finally, research is really cool. It turns the low-level peasants into really superior, solid units by the end game. So basically, that's something that you should be mindful of, that these peasant long spearmen, well, they're gonna get really good. And of course, it gives a lot of good buffs, especially in terms of, for instance, let me show you here, especially for campaign movement range and casualty replenishment rate. This is everywhere. There's a lot of those that affect those, and less upkeep, for instance. So overall, when you reach the end of this, you're gonna have tons of good outcomes, of course, especially with the upkeep, with the casual replenishment rate, to the point that you're going to feel that the game is much easier by the late game. As you know, skills are divided into the Lord specific ones, such as these ones. Then you have the melee line, or the yellow line as it is called. You also have the magic line, and specifically for Yuan Bo, he has a nice combination of spells. I'll leave it to you to find that out, of course. You have red line or army, and then you have blue line or for the campaign. Let me start with the blue line. It may prove expensive in terms of how many skills you're going to need, because stuff like the lightning strike, of course, stuff like less reduced upkeep and more casualty replenishment rate are on the second part of the line. So without anything really too interesting in the first part, and you have so many to go for, I typically just would go for Route Marcher and then anything else, just to make sure that Yuan Bo is very powerful in combat overall. Red line is also quite expensive. It is good to spend some time deciding which units you're going to be buffing from the beginning until the end. So for instance, if I'm going with a straight up infantry and missile infantry combination, then I'm going to get these two, but it's still going to be difficult to allocate for everything, because everything is quite split up. More on that a little bit later. Then you have different lords, of course. Now one, which is the Celestial General. He's really good at leading from the front, which is excellent. Has some decent abilities, we'll see that next. But you're still lacking actually a replenishment hero, sadly, which implies it may be difficult to overcome some losses after battles, okay? But overall, all of these new lords and even the heroes have some effects on the army itself, which means that it's really cool to have a couple of them following for support, basically, and to change up things. So here are the red line skills for the faction. Now they're divided mostly into categories: all infantry, all missiles, etc. The good side is they can use the lower tier units and later on upgrade those units while still benefiting from these skills. You don't waste those skill points. Bad part is that it becomes expensive in terms of the amount of skills that you need for, let's say, a typically balanced army. Let's say that you want infantry, missile infantry, artillery, and cavalry. You'll need 4 of these. If you want to add some monsters, then it's going to be tricky. You're going to have to choose. So, Yuan Bo. He gives some upkeep bonuses to Onyx Crowman, Jade Lion, and Jet Lion. Okay, and then you do have some bonuses versus infantry there for those units. Less upkeep when in own territory. This is great. It means that he can have an expensive army and be fine. And then a little bit of spell resistance. So your units are kind of very resistant against enemy spellcasters, which is excellent. So in essence, just getting some infantry units and some single entities with some crowmen. This is a fairly typical rush army. You know, I'm going to use this to just move forward towards the enemy and fight him on the field. Or you can have, you know, just some missile units and stay back. Instead of the crossbow, of course, you can get some artillery. It's up to you. Or you can have, you know, a little bit more of a typical army, let's say, with infantry, missile infantry, some cavalry, of course some flying cavalry. That's always good in terms of presence, and some single entities. I'm just picking these guys. Of course you can use the terracotta sentinels by all means. And in terms of the heroes, always note that this is kind of like a placeholder. Okay, I always recommend that you bring a caster and a melee hero, but overall you only have 2 caster heroes overall. So by all means just choose one of them, choose different combinations, and it's really up to you. Okay, in terms of other armies, this is what I typically recommend before the patch. Of course, feel welcome to change anything here, but some combinations, of course, with celestial units, it's really good with some artillery there, with some single entities. But note the cost in terms of red line skills. They are kind of costly, which is a little bit of a problem. With the new celestial general, it's really good because he does have a little bit of a choice here. You can even go into more armor, more weapon strength, or more charge bonus. You can see there with the Lord's army, and that's why I recommend these three kind of style armies. So this is if I go into the armor, you know, just for the Longmar Riders to have a little bit more armor and overall these infantry units. This is if I want to have more weapon strength, specifically focusing on the single entities, and these war drums will follow the infantry around. Or if I want just a charge bonus, then I'll just have a very mobile, fast army overall to overcome the enemy, and probably just trying to get more ambitious, focusing on this sort of army. All good just to try out different combinations, but by all means you can always use just typical doom stacks if you wish. This is just to get a little bit more flavor in the campaign. So, as final notes, the faction really feels very good to play, especially because of the added mechanics, you know, especially with the Matters of State. It's really interesting, it's really cool. You get to do a lot of different stuff with these mechanics, of course, and it's all about, you know, just rushing through to one of them and trying to, you know, see what you can do with those. It's really an interesting mechanic. I really love it. The location alone being different, it's such a breath of fresh air. You have new foes. You have to use your Cathay units against completely different armies that you were used to in the Cathay area. It's likely to also be one of the easiest factions overall to play as. It has significantly reduced the difficulty to master as well because of the simplified yin and yang mechanics for provinces. So Cathay now feels, especially with Yuan Bo, a very easy introduction. I would definitely recommend this for beginners, but veterans will enjoy it as well because it's such a different breath of fresh air. So your army will always consist of good holding infantry, great missiles and artillery, good flying units, good single entities, good magic users, and it's still a little bit weak in anti-large outside the infantry. Now replenishment is average, especially concerning the climate, but it's still a bit of a struggle if you attempt to go for domination or whole map completion. You do have some bonuses, of course, especially in tech, but it's still a complicated matter to do. I believe now it is time to fight for Yuan Bo of Grand Cathay.